Hi, everyone. It's Martha Novak, and the show is Real Talk with Martha Novak. Um, I'm so glad to be talking with you today. We have some really good information for you today. This series has been on consciousness and enlightenment and uh, happiness in those states. And my husband last week, and I hope I'll do this right. If I don't, I'm going to cut off Facebook Live. But comments will appear here. We've had a hard time. Hello, Lisa. Oh, I'm getting your comments this week. Yay! He had shown me how to do that last week, and I wanted to make sure I could do it without cutting everybody off. But I really love to see your comments as we go. And here we go. So, hello, Lisa. Yay! First time in 2 weeks I've been able to do that. Say hello, Lisa. All right. Um, we are talking about consciousness. We are talking about um, happiness and what brings those states about. But I found a great article. I'm going to leave my notes for a minute and go to the article because I think this has everything to do with everything. It was an article on why are we so afraid of the COVID-19 virus. I loved this article. This article was not about the virus, of course. Nothing's ever about what it seems. It's about the existential fears that this virus sets off. Now, that's my domain, right? So we're going to go into talk about that in just a minute, but not about the virus, but about happiness and consciousness and all of that we talk about on this show. So it should be quite the show. All right, guys, let's do a quick prayer, get us all on the same page, and then I'm going to launch into everything. Thank you, Lisa. All right, here we go. Dear God, who is all there is, you who are all we are, and all everything is in this world. We thank you so much for the light and the dark, the duality of all of life. We are part of that, and we stand as full participants today, ready to receive the next bit of information that makes our lives better and that probably challenges us to do something else. Good morning, Bruce. Dear God, we open ourselves now to see, hear, sense, and know what you would have us do. As we seek the truth that lies in your enlightenment, open our minds, open our hearts and our very being, and we ask that we find that aspect in us. That is you, that we may invest in that and change. We thank you so much, dear God, and we open ourselves to all that you have for us here as we seek to be the vessel for your divinity and your truth and your love. Thank you so much. We say this prayer in your name, in the name of the Ascended Masters, our love-centered guides and friends, and in the name of everyone listening to this show, and so it is. Amen. So, I found this great article. It is, Why Are We So Afraid of COVID-19, the COVID-19 virus? It's by Sarah Showalter Van Tongeren. What a name, but it's a nice, big one. Sarah A. Showalter Van Tongeren, who has apparently written a book called The Courage to Suffer, which I happen to like that title. I do feel like suffering is optional, but before we find out suffering is optional, we got to get our peace made with suffering, because often it's just a signpost to tell us to look somewhere, and that's God's love. You see, we have to kind of expand our minds past God being Santa Claus, to God being someone who loves us, to give us our own choices and a very distinct path to consciousness, which we will choose to take or not. no suffering about it. Suffering is optional. You see, it isn't what happens to us in life, it's our reaction to it. You understand that? Now, that said, I thought there was some just, we're doing a series right now on, hello, Kat, good morning. We're doing a series right now on how to be authentic. How to be authentic. Certainly that requires consciousness. Certainly that requires our being whole, mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. See, we're talking about all the elements of that, and there are so many elements of it, right? But this particular article on COVID-19, and I want to take it out of that context and put it in ours right now. She puts forth 4 existentialist fears. Now, I taught this in my advanced class recently, because if you can conquer these, you're well on your way to getting over every issue you have. Because it was these fears, these existentialist fears, that really caused us as children to seek to cope in our ways. And then as we grow up and we get to be our age, we call them, well, I have an issue. Okay. So I think these are very, very good places to start, because they are ground level, if you will. The first one is that we have a fear of groundlessness. She defines this as a loss of control and the burden of freedom. Groundlessness. Now, you keep in mind when we're talking about the loss of control and the burden, which is an interesting word, of freedom, we are talking about how our ego child's mind perceives things, not our highest self. Because in our highest self, God is always the one that has control. We may consciously be aware of some of the mechanisms or not, but we, in our more conscious states, realize there's a plan here even if we don't see it. David Bohm proved it, the great physicist, when he found the chaos to order theory. You remember that study? He had a jar with a what do you want to call it, a paddle inside and a handle on the top, so you could stir what was in the jar. The jar was filled with glycerin. He dropped a drop of ink, as I recall the experiment, into the jar of glycerin, and he stirred it, and of course the ink disappeared. But when he cranked it back the other way, the ink reconstituted. The ink was there, which led to his theory that everything has an intrinsic order that we may not see. I happen to believe that everything has an intrinsic order we may not see, that we go from chaos to order, and chaos is the way things change. It is us as human beings and our fears and our fatalistic leanings and our romanticism sometimes that puts the spin that chaos is bad. Chaos is just change. Chaos is just a term in physics, and it's going to lead to new order. Everything is chaos before it turns to new order. You have a new baby in your house. That's chaos until you get a schedule, right? Well, who's going to say that chaos is bad? What are you going to do? Put the baby back where it came from? No. That's a good thing. It's just change. And we as human beings tend to be very afraid of change. Really? We shouldn't be. Change is the movement of God. Now, a lot of times we're creating things we don't want. And what consciousness is about is helping, one of the things it's about is helping you create the things you do want. And showing you what you're doing to create the things you don't want. The creation is still working. Good for you. You're proving it's working. You're just creating things you don't want because you're investing in the wrong things. And how you communicate with the universe is what you primarily think about, where your energy goes most of the time, you see. There is a program, there's a radio show, several radio shows on creating the life you want. But after this series, I thought I'd run another one with new evidentiary stuff in it. I don't have COVID, but I do have some allergies, and we have some heavy-duty pollens out there right now, so occasionally my nose runs. All right. Can't hide anything on the radio, can you, and on television? By the way, ladies and gentlemen, if you're new to me, you can call and talk to me at 425, nope, I'm giving you the wrong number. Forget that. 347-850-1647. Now that number is going to get you on the air, okay? If you want to make a comment or ask a question, here we are at 347-850-1647. Otherwise, I just keep talking. All right. Groundlessness. So the ego child's mind from time to time really does feel a loss of control, and they consider that a bad thing. This is illusionary because the fact is it never had control to begin with. Never did. God's the only thing that's ever had control. It's the way it should be. Now, who do I mean by God, and what do I mean by God? To me, God is an energy. It is the energy of all things. And what confuses us all about God is that God appears two ways according to our understanding. The individual's understanding. I'm sorry about the dog barking. I put a collar on that I think my husband has taken off, and he just yaps instead of this collar that squirts citronella and is supposed to, he's not supposed to like that, but listen to him. So that collar is not on right now, I guarantee you. And so try to ignore the dog barking, and so will I. Okay. Here's the confusing thing about God. God appears as the absence of itself, according to our understanding, which is lack, all right, which is deprivation, and all the things that go along with that dark state. Thank you, Bruce. Or God appears as the fullness of itself, which is a loved-based self as opposed to the ego child's mind fear-based self. Now, these are two states. This is confusing about God because we don't realize in the world, in our child's mind, that God appears these two ways according to our understanding. You see, this is God because we go from the fear-based self to the love-based self in consciousness and enlightenment. That's what we do. That's our spiritual journey. That's our quest throughout life. That's our privilege, right? But in the ego child's mind state, the ego child's mind says we're doing it all, and we've got to become forces because we have to meet the forces of the world, and so we start all these coping mechanisms that deceive us until we start on the path that you're listening to right now, which is consciousness, and we realize, wait a minute, there's a lot more. There's something beyond all this that I've created as coping mechanisms. I think we all hope that. And then we set out to prove it. Now, that isn't everybody, but that's you all who are listening to a show like this. And that pleases me very much. It's the whole reason I'm talking about this. And I'm dedicated to this because your potential lies in this other place. Well, hello, Patrick. Mashed potato sandwiches with you for breakfast today? Mashed potato sandwiches. Ew. You know, my husband would like that because he's Austrian, and they like potatoes any old way. I'm afraid I am not that. Um, oh, aren't you sweet? Pat, thank you. Thank you. I'm so glad to hear from you. I've missed hearing from you the last couple of weeks. Not because you didn't write in, but because I didn't know where that was, you know, but I found it. I found you. So this is all good. So, um, that loss of control is an illusion to begin with because we don't have any control. We have a control in God because if we're using that aspect of ourselves, which is our highest selves, our love-centered self, have anyone ever heard any words from Jesus just talking Jesus? I'm not sure what that means, Bruce. If you can explain that more, I'd appreciate that very much because Jesus was certainly an enlightened person. Oh, yes. Thank you, Pat. Pat is referencing about the mashed potato sandwiches. He's referencing another show. I have a phobia. It's an out and out phobia. I don't like wet bread. Oh my God, wet bread. That's a whole nother show and a whole nother story. But that's what Pat was talking about. Thank you, sweetie. So when we're talking about the loss of control, the fact is we can never lose it. We're going to lose our ego child's mind. They're going to have less and less influence on us. We still will have our ego. The ego is supposed to be there. It's supposed to protect us. Okay? It does a good job. But the ego child's mind's the part of us that runs with scissors. It's the part of us that still thinks like a child, behaves like a child, reacts like a child. Is it really necessary now? No. And they're more mature and mature and mature, emotionally mature particularly, ways to react to life while understanding and keeping the awe of it all. Now, Bruce says, like when you go pray, people say he will talk. Okay. When you're talking about, Bruce is asking a good question and making a good comment here. And that is, he's asking, I think, for what we think about people that go and pray that Jesus will give them an answer. Now, here's where I feel about this. I think that Jesus, God, guides, or our highest guides, we're all aspects of God. So you hear people getting hung up on who am I talking to when I'm praying. Here's what I think. I think a lot of times who we are really praying to is and this is hard to understand, and I don't mean to offend anybody, but we have an ego child's mind self, which is fear-based and petty and selfish and self-involved and self-indulgent. And we have the highest self, which is the pure energies of God, the pure energies of love. All right? And our journey is to go from one to the other. It's not so clean a journey. Sometimes we have one leg in one thing and one leg in another. Sometimes our good intentions are tainted by some very selfish intentions. But consciousness is about, getting all of that cleaned up and so we can live more and more in higher energies. Yes, and I understand. Bruce is saying, how do you know that hearing what voices you're hearing are not demons, he's using that term, or a higher self? And I've got an answer for that. So hang on for just a minute with me, Bruce, while I explain this. I don't believe in demons. I don't. I don't believe in the devil. Now, I may lose you there, but I think anybody who's making a case for there being demons and a real devil are making a case to keep their fear. Now, that's just my own personal belief. What I do believe is that man's ego is pretty evil, and not all the time, but I think it can be. It's self-indulgent, it's selfish, and we have the ability to let a lot of light in or very little. And we call people who let very little light and love in evil. Now, you've got these two parts of you. I've got these two parts of me as well. Okay? So we've got both of these. Now, how do you tell the difference in the voices? Because this is one of the things, Bruce, that I teach right away to students that come in to me, because you've got to know the difference between these two things. So I'm going to give you some characteristics. You may want to write these down. Anybody who does wonder about this question, get a pencil and paper and jot this down. Number one, if the ego child's mind, the part that you're calling the devilish mind, is the one that's talking to you, it's going to be negative, it's going to be self-absorbed, it's going to be self-indulgent, it's going to be all about you and nobody else at the expense of other people, or it's going to be all about other people at the expense of you, which is still all about you because you've just made yourself the classic victim by doing that, you see? So we never get away from the fact that it's fear-based and it's all about us. Okay. It's fear-based. There is no real love to it. Now let's look at the highest self mind. The true Jesus mind, or the true God mind. This is love-based all the way. This is a mind that creates a system whereby we both win. It's a win-win, either that we agree to agree or to disagree, but we still leave friends. That's the higher mind. What do you think all this wrangling in society is right now? What mind do you think everybody's coming from? They're coming from their little kid's mind, the fear-based mind. Now, that's a choice. That's God too. But the higher and purer energies of God are the ones that come from the higher mind. They are loving, they are nurturing, they are self-nurturing as much as helpful to other people. They are kind and generous and good. Those are those energies. This is how you tell the difference. And when you have a thought and you're wondering about this, it's not a question to say, in my opinion, is this a demon talking to me? You're the demon. We're all the demon, by the way. Or we are not. And consciousness and consciousness studies is decreasing this ego child's mind energy. And every time you confront issues and get beyond them and they go dormant in your nervous system, guess where all that energy goes? It goes into the now, and it goes into your spiritual energy, because you're a mixture of mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual energies. Your spiritual energy gets stronger, and this is how you wake up, and you know God is there. You know that love is a true and real thing because you're living it all the time. Now, this isn't an airy-fairy fantasy. A lot of people that come to me who have needed fantasy in their lives because their lives have been bad and they're not comfortable with reality, try to make God and the system that I'm teaching a fantasy. I'm going to take you right out of that. This is reality. God either exists as the absence of itself or the fullness of itself. And you're listening to a show like this because you want to believe that God is the fullness of itself, but it requires a mind change, an arc of learning and of experiencing life and of facing those inner demons so that you realize they're puffs of air. That's consciousness. I hope that explains it for you, darling, because I think that was a very, very good question. And if you are asking it, a lot of people are thinking that and have not asked. So we're delighted that you popped on and did ask that. And we want to hear from all of you all out there. Now, I'm on Blog Talk Radio. Some of you listen to me that way, but I'm also on Facebook Live, and you can reach either of those venues through my website, which is marthanovak.com. And if you go into radio shows, there are buttons to click that will give you quick access to the show. All right. Now, I want to go back to the fear of groundlessness because it is one of our existential fears. My point in talking about these four things is that if you conquered these things now through your consciousness studies, for God's sake, what would there be to worry about? I'd say your life would be much different than it is. But we fear these things, and as long as these fear things are there, until we resolve them in our psyche, we are very, very prone to think and feel and behave from our ego child's mind. Because these are the things that we were afraid of initially before language. And these are the things that formed our issues. You understand? So if we are going back to the ground level and say, what could I have done differently here? By the way, nobody could do it differently here because you are a kid. You don't have words for these things. You don't have the developed brain. You don't even have the developed brain until you're in your 20s. Way you can entertain these existentialist ideas as a kid, but you feel them and you cope with them as best you can because they are fears in every human being. You see? I hope so. All right, moving right along now. What I'm wanting you to understand is we fear the loss of control, and that is an ego child's mind issue. When I've described the ego child's mind just now, that's an ego child's mind issue. It's all about me, 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 me. I need control. I need to feel like I can, I've got some control. I've got to have some say, we say in our oppositional defiance. The fact is, we do. When we really look at this and realize that in the highest self and in the lower self, God is all we are. But it is much more easy and effortless and kinder and gentler and more loving when we're in the highest selves and we say yes to all these wonderful possibilities and our potential. It is the ultimate going with in cooperation, you see. I'm sure you do. We don't lose control when we're in this higher self because all of those marvelous tendencies of yours, predilections of those talents of yours, they're all God. They're there to take you in a direction that you're supposed to go for your own happiness. This whole thing about, I can't do this because God will take me somewhere I don't want to go, is so much blather. It's an excuse. That can't happen, you see? Because God is all you are. The tendencies, the desire to be of service, to help, to give your talents, to learn more. All of these things are calls from God, don't you see? How wonderful. How wonderful. So you're not going to lose control by becoming more. You're going to work in further cooperation, maybe for the first time in your life, with real cooperation with your highest energies to create some wonderful things. And it won't be the struggle that it is in the ego child's mind. You know, the ego child's mind is a child trying to make money, a child trying to be well thought of at work, a child trying to create the next symphony. It's the childish part of all of us. And we're doing the best work we can in that ego child's mind. Make no mistake about it. But the fact is, there is a whole lot more to you than that little dot. I say that little dot because one of my favorite images is to draw the biggest circle you can possibly draw. And then the full acknowledgement is that the circle has no end. It's an endless thing. And then put a tiny little dot on the page. That tiny little dot is the ego child's mind. But often that tiny little dot runs the show instead of the other way around. If we're talking energy, this ought to have more energy than that. You see? Okay. And that's what consciousness is. It's taking the energy away from the ego child's mind and applying it to the now. And you wake up with more energy in the spiritual body and you become a spiritual being in physical form rather than a physical being who thinks about spirituality once in a while when it serves you. You understand, I hope. I want to address the burden of freedom. The burden of freedom. This is part of the fear of groundlessness, the burden of freedom. Do you understand? This is very much an ego child's mind statement, the burden of anything. Because freedom is a privilege. It's a privilege every man should have inside him, right? We would never think, if we are in the right mind, the higher mind, of this as being a burden. It's a marvelous privilege. You get to think what you need to think. You need to do what you need to do. You have all the choices in the world. I don't know who's sending me car fuel, but he's cute. So, when we say that there's a fear of groundlessness, which is defined as the loss of control and the burden of freedom, you can understand what mind is creating those specific words. Instead of having the more global perspective that God is in control, let's cooperate with that, because that's who we are as well, and that our freedom is our choices, our opportunities to think and create and discover and serve and God knows what else. That could be just wonderful. All right. This Dr. Van Tongeren, goes on to say there are always things that we can control in our lives, such as where we plan to travel, and in terms of COVID, if we plan to travel, and washing our hands and covering our mouths and that kind of thing. But a more developed brain, a more developed mind, realizes that we do not ultimately have control over what happens to us. There's something far more profound at work here. And this should not make us paranoid and afraid. What mind is that? The ego child's mind. But we should thrive in this moment. Make it a good one. Serve, give, learn, grow right here. You see? So the groundlessness comes in the ego child's mind realizing that things are out of control. Certainly, this is one of the fears that's setting off COVID. When I talk to people about this, it's like, why be afraid? Why not just take the precautions that you're comfortable with? A quick note. Several years ago, before my darling husband, this was years and years ago when I bought my new home, um, I got a security service. And one of my friends said, but you can just surround it with a bubble, your home. You don't have, I mean, why? I don't understand why you're getting a security service. And here's what I said, and here's what I say to you. We all have our levels of what makes us feel safe. I get a security service. I am not comfortable having a gun myself. I don't want a gun. And somebody else might be very comfortable owning a gun. I'm very comfortable with the security service. Whatever your threshold is, you should do it because you don't have to worry about being safe from that point on. The whole point is to reach that threshold, whatever yours is, so you don't have to worry. So you don't have to think about that again, you see. So that becomes very important in this COVID thing as well. I'm very comfortable with wearing my mask, and I've got a good one with a little lining, and I've got my gloves, and I carry Everclear. Do you all know about Everclear, Golden Grain? I think there's another alcohol out there that's 180 proof called Diesel. These are very, very strong alcohols. They're not your run-of-the-mill Scotch and bourbon, so don't use that. They're too low a proof. But this real strong proofed alcohol, the three I just mentioned, kill all viruses and bacteria. So I spray my gloves when I come out of the store. I strip them off. I then certainly spray my hands with the alcohol. I come home and boil my mask. That's all I'm going to do. I'm going to stay out of crowds. But heck, you know what? I stay out of crowds anyway. I'm an empath. That's not very comfortable for me to be in the middle of a crowd. All right? So you find whatever your level is to feel safe. And if, by the way, you're going beyond that, I have a client that was so cute. It was interesting. She came to a friend of mine who's a doctor. And my doctor friend just said, on the sly, I want you to know that she sprayed every single surface. She just went nuts, scrubbing this whole place down before she could sit and tell me what's wrong. I was real proud of this woman, though. You know why? Because when she called me for her session, she said, I want to tell you about what I did. It's over the top. You see, I don't really care what you're doing. I want to fix it for you ultimately. But there's no judgment about this. You're going to do it until you don't have to do it anymore. But I want us to be honest about what you're doing as over the top or not. You see? That's a bit over the top. She's using a lot of energy she doesn't have to use. And so that's energy that you create your life with. That's energy she creates her life with. So we're looking for anything that is out of the range of normal. Everybody will say, oh, there is no normal. That's right, but there's a range of it. And we want you just participating in the range of normal. That's all. The range is quite wide. All right, so that's the first one. The fear of groundlessness. The second existential fear is the fear of isolation. Now let's talk about that one. Dr. Van Tongeren, doesn't just roll off the tongue for me, goes on to say the existential fear of isolation is the fear of being truly alone. The fear is the realization that each of us experiences our own life from our own unique perspective alone. Even though we have close relationships, we are the only ones who know what it's like to live out our lives with our own experiences. although we share our experiences with those closest to us, no one will ever know our innermost workings. It's interesting. I think people that are trying to find partners who are in fantasy are trying to find somebody that truly understands them. Instead of realizing in the highest self sense, no one ever will but you, get on with it and find a wonderful, compatible partner that's a good person and that you have some things in common with and some things not, and create a lovely life together. But guys, this is airy-fairy fantasy stuff. Fantasy is its own reward, that somebody out there will truly understand you. Nobody is supposed to. Nobody is supposed to. Your parents did not recognize who you are, and when we have our hand glued to our forehead like Camille, oh, nobody understands me, and nobody's supposed to, because you're supposed to do that. Now, let me tell you about fantasy. Fantasy is everybody's heroin. It actually hits the opiate centers of the brain. It's there to make you feel good. And if it doesn't make you feel good, because they're negative fantasies as well as positive fantasies, what it does is propel you into soothing yourself, which in the whole rest of your life you don't do. So that's how you're getting it. Oh, the mind is tricky, guys, the ego, child's mind. We've got to bring these things forth and put them on the table, because otherwise we're all fooling ourselves. And that I can't allow you to do, because you've got to have a better life than that. This is reality-based stuff. So she goes on to say, no one knows precisely what it is to be you, or to be me, or to be anybody. Aside from me, no one knows who I actually am. You can say the same thing. And she proposes, and I happen to agree with her, that this terrifies us. If there is an aspect of us in the child's mind still, child doesn't want to be alone. A child doesn't want to be autonomous. A child doesn't want to do, no, we are dependent. Now, here's the irony. We have to be comfortable with being alone before we can be with other folks. It's this journey into self to know who you really are that helps you find the motivations for everybody in the world. Yes, we are all connected. You bet we are, as we belong to a human race together. However, as long as you remain a child, you're separate. Oh, there's a herd mentality, but it's not really connected to anybody else, not on a deep sense. It's attached. You keep people around because of what you might need them for. You don't trust yourself all the way. You're not a grown-up inside, and you know it. So it is the emotionally mature person that's able to handle this existentialist fear of isolation. Look, we're born alone most of the time. Even if we're twins or triplets, we're born alone. That birth experience is ours, and you'll die that way. It is a personal thing. Why isn't that all right? It is. The fact is, we have this other mind, the larger mind that is not at all a child's. So if we keep indulging and indulging and indulging in the child, we never get what we want. And we never truly connect with people on the deepest level of intimacy in our lives. That only happens in the higher mind. And that's what you guys all want. And that's why you're listening to a show like this. But you got to confront what's in the way, you see? And the drama, oh, I'm alone. And the feeling sorry for yourself. And the pitifulness and the victimhood that you often convince yourself of, because every human being does. I'm not just talking about you personally. Has got to go. Has got to be confronted. Certainly, that's part of us. I'm not talking about driving this part of you out with a stick. I'm talking about resolving it so it can go dormant in your nervous system and you can be more. That you'll take more energy to invest in larger and more global and more beautiful and more loving things. You see? Because right now, it's invested in a lot of emotion. The fear of being alone. Well, you should know how to be alone. You should know how to entertain yourself there. You should know you're going to be fine. People are always surprised when I say, I'm a bloomin' introvert to the max. Everybody goes, you, an introvert? I can't believe it. I mean, you're so out there, right? I'm a major introvert. Now, all introvert and extrovert means is introvert means you get more energy out of being alone than you do in any other way. And I do. I can't entertain myself. I've got books, a stack of books that I can imbue myself with, and God knows I'm looking for that time in my life where I can go more into that in the next few days. Extroverts get energy from being with other people. There's anything wrong with either state. But as I am proving to you right now, you don't get to be one or the other. You have to be both in this world. If you are afraid to be visible and extroverted, it simply means we got an issue or issues in the way. Nice little mix of things that we've got to analyze, because there are times that you need to be out there in the world, and I don't want you suffering the experiences of the damned to do what you need to do as a human being, as a participant in life. And the opposite is true as well. Oh, thank you. You guys are the sweetest things in the world, and I love those hearts. Thank you. We want you to be able to do both. We have to do both in this world. It is the rare individual that gets to do one or the other. Really, honestly. I need to be out there, even though I'm an introvert. Introverts need to be in there as well, you see? So we've got to learn to do both, and we have to get out of our own way and realize what's stopping us. We may have a natural predilection, but we need to do both. You understand? So we have to look at those things. That helps our isolationism too. We have to find out what our blocks are before we find out that we really are all connected, whether someone's in the room with us or not. There's a sensitivity that opens. You know, I work remotely. That's most of my clients. I have some that come to my home office, but the truth is, I work on the phone all the time. That's 98% of my clients. People say, how in the world do you work on the phone? And it's because if I've got your energy, I can work on you 6,000 miles away. I do. I have clients all over the world from time to time. It's not a question of you having to be physically present. Energy is energy. Your unique energy is your unique signature. I just tune into that once I know you. Sometimes I can tune into that without knowing you. I'm not intrusive with it, by the way. I want you to know that. I get real tickled. I have been in, I'm a business coach too. so word gets around, I guess. And I've seen grown men, I get in the elevator and they kind of squish up against the wall as if I'm going to read them. And kids, I'm paying good money to read people. I'm not just going around reading people. Who wants to do that? That's for the television shows. Okay, number 3. The third existential fear is that we are all struggling and fearful of our identity. Now let's talk about that according to this doctor. Identity is the understanding, she says, of who you are. Identity and isolation are intimately tied together. Loneliness is born out of this fear. So next time you're feeling lonely, I want you to realize that you're wrestling with identity. It isn't that you're wrestling with isolation. That's what it seems like on the surface. Underneath that, and nothing is what it seems. You all know that by now after all of this talk that we've been doing for all these Sunday mornings. Nothing's what it seems. It is a question of identity. She goes on to say that people often isolate themselves because they are fearful that others will learn who they truly are and ultimately reject them. We fear rejection, so we change who we are to fit how we think others want to see us. By the way, that happened in your early childhood home. We do this so that we can feel accepted and loved. I see this constantly. I mean, this is something we must look at when we're working, right? We look at the child that, let's say, was born to a very depressed parent, and they just try to be the cute little thing they are. They try all these little maneuvers, and nothing works. And so what the child might do, because it's just one of the avenues, is to take on that depression. They'll take on the depression too, because their survival is at stake. And in the child's mind, if we take that on for our dads, then our dads will be relieved and be more of a dad to us and take care of us, because we're the child, we're dependent, we can't take care of ourselves, and we'll survive. It's all about our survival, you see. She goes on to give you, for example, we might have shared our concern about the pandemic and then been dismissed by others around us. We can say, oh, we're afraid of it and be dissed, or we can say, oh, there's nothing to it and be dissed. Either way, it isn't about what we feel, and it isn't certainly about the pandemic. This issue is about not feeling apart and being rejected by someone, possibly humiliated, possibly ridiculed. This can challenge, she says, our ability to even begin to acknowledge who we are, because we fear being known and having reactions like that. I'll say that a lot of people had reactions like that when they were little girls and boys. Your family made fun of you. Your mother criticized you. Your father ignored you or told you you were wrong. However it happened, it happened. And you don't remember most of it. As a matter of fact, I'm going to say that one of the reasons my methodology is effective is because I go to a bottom line, and the bottom line isn't what you remember. The bottom line is what the energy was formed, how the energy was formed in the womb before you had the words. So when you come out, and you live your life, whatever was in the womb that you didn't understand, let's say the father not wanting another baby in the house, your mother receives those creates those chemicals, they get transferred to the child. You don't understand that because you're just a little ball of undeveloped love, right? So you get born, you've got this thing in your psyche, in your energy, and you're looking for an explanation for that, and there it is. People don't want you. You're an outsider. And then you start collecting that evidence. You go to grade school. That's what happens in kindergarten. That's what happens in... Wow. You got a good issue there. You've got an issue that you think you have evidence for, but only because you look like it. You remember that old adage? When you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. That's what's going on here. Okay. The fourth, existential fear. This will not surprise you. I've done other radio shows on this. Is the fear of death. The fear of death. Do you understand, and then I'll read what she says, but do you understand that every single issue that you have, every one that you have or anybody else has in the world, is to avoid this fear, is to help you survive so you don't die, to help you cope so you don't die. But what if we make our peace with death? Okay. She goes on to say about this issue, it is in our nature, it is our nature to live, to strive, and to create meaning out of this life. I do think that's our nature. I think people forget that. I think of that marvelous book. What is it? It's by Viktor Frankl. Not the Courage to Create. That's Eric Fromm. A Man's Search for Meaning. Viktor Frankl. Man's Search for Meaning. If you want to read a good book, or the Doctor and the Soul, any of his books. Oh my God, this man blows me away. Of course, he's dead now, but he was a brilliant thinker, and he was Jewish. He was put in the concentration camps. I think he was Austrian, if I'm not mistaken. My husband will be so proud. Anyway, his book, he was working on Man's Search for Meaning when his book was confiscated and he was put in a camp. And he wrote the book when he finally was liberated. And he talks about how that book kept him alive. He would go over and over and over again what he was writing, what he was going to write, what he had written, so he wouldn't forget it. He found every little scrap of paper he could and anything he could mark with to make notes. He had a purpose for living. I think some people forget that they need a purpose for living. This is what gives meaning to their lives. So I ask you not to forget that. We are, she goes on to say, evolutionary programmed for life, for survival. It's true. When we are faced with the potential for our own demise, we are challenged with, what is the meaning of life after all? We're challenged with that question. What is the meaning of life for me? We realize that life is temporary and that we will all die. However, this realization shatters our assumptions because we never really think that we will be the ones to be faced with death now. She goes on to say, and I think rightly, that the reason COVID-19 is so scary is because it hits all four of these very existential points. I think she's right about that, but I think many things in life do. And I will say to you that if you handled your fear of these things, you'd be conscious. You'd be well on the way to being over your issues, knowing that God is your partner. You'd be in full cooperation. We would be going to town already. So, as we're talking about who are you, your authenticity, and your happiness, it's these things that you so fear that make you unhappy: groundlessness, isolation, identity, death. Now, I've done a lot of shows, I think radio shows on death, so they're out there for you to hear. I am told over and over again by Spirit that our experience of death as human beings on this side, not the ones that are dying, and the ones that are dying, are quite different experiences. Uh-oh. Oh, good. I thought I had lost Blog Talk Radio. Are quite different experiences. We tend, if we are the ones that are left, we see the body degenerating of our loved ones. We see them suffering. This is a shell that is going to go eventually. And the dying process is not necessarily an attractive one. I will tell you a personal story. My mother died of spinal cancer. And it was a really horrific death. As hospice told me, it's, how when you're in the dentist chair and a dentist might hit a nerve in your tooth, imagine that pain all over your body. We were very careful at one point until she died not to touch her, not to play music, to keep the lights low, to keep our voices low, because any kind of nervous system stimulation could trigger off a spasm. And we were trying to keep the pain down with medication and certainly anything we could do. It's very hard when you're losing someone you love not to at least hold their hands. But I made sure I did not at one point. What I was going to share with you about this was this. My mom was blind going into the death experience. She had lost her eyesight through something called venous stasis retinopathy, which is bleeding inside the eyeballs. You usually can do something about that, but my mother had odd eyeballs. She didn't have eyes that dilated, so they could not get into the pupil with a laser beam to stop the bleeding. They usually cauterize the ends of those blood vessels, as I understand it, right? So her eyes fill with blood, and she was blind the last 25 years of her life. So as she was dying, her eyes started taking on a real strange cast. One was open, one was closed. She lost a tremendous amount of weight. She looked like a little skeleton lying in this big hospital bed. And I remember a story. She had a minister she was particularly fond of who was Korean. And he came to the house to visit her one time and got out of there as fast as possible. And he stopped me at the front door as I was letting him out. And he said, "Don't look at your mother. Don't see her like this. Don't look at her at all. Don't." And I said, "That's my mother. You bet I'm going to do that." And I let him out, and I was very angry at the time. Now I understand where he was coming from. It's fine. But I knew what I had to do. And I looked the whole time. Now here's what I want to tell you. At one point in my sight, that poor little body became one of the prettiest things I'd ever seen in my life. I kept looking until there was I can't even, what do I want to say? A transcendent light that emerged from her body. I swear to goodness, sometimes I think there was an incandescence in this. She looked like she was glowing, and she was beautiful. Nothing had changed except something had opened in me to really be able to see that. Now, I'm going to tell you right now that I think all of life is like that. That taught me so much. And that is, I don't think that we should ever be running away or avoiding anything. I think we ought to look at it face on, because what we see in the beginning is not what we end up seeing. If we'll just keep present and keep open and be willing to see something that we're not seeing in the beginning, you'll find out God's right there. And there's something else. You'll find out that no matter what it is, it's 100% okay. It just is. And the system of God is perfect. And we're all learning to work with it and work within it. It's extremely important to do that. I do tell you the truth. That's why I do these radio shows. I want you to know that. It'll make your life easier, better. You'll be opening to your potential. You'll have more to give the world. You'll be more fulfilled and happier. And you will know without a doubt that you are not alone. This fear of isolation is a myopic way of looking at things. It's small. You're not isolated at all. You never will be. This fear of groundlessness is an illusion. It's a negative way of looking at life when life is real and energetic and creative. This fear of who you are is probably the biggest illusion of all. You know why? Because God is all you are, the light in the dark. And you've just got to journey from the lack of God in your mind to the fullness. What a marvelous privilege to do. Oh, we get frustrated along the way. I was the biggest one. I was the biggest whiner of all of you. Really? My husband might say, I still am. But who's listening? Guys, we got a great journey here. God's all you are. When you say, oh, I'm so afraid to let go of my egoic child's mind identity, you're forgetting that God and love and creativity and all this wonderful balanced stuff is all you are. You just used your issues to get in the way, to confuse yourself, to cloud that. That's all that's going on here. That's it. So let's find out what those are. Get those out of the way. Assimilate them. Put them to bed. And be more. You know, if you came up with your worst fears right now and you wrote them all down on a page and all your limitations and all that, and if I asked you, oh, is that all you, is this all you are? If this is all you are, that's all I want to know. Is this all you are? You and everybody else would say no. And yet, you're investing in this instead of in the other. And that's where you need to work on yourself. That's where you need to open up. Because you're investing in junk bonds. It just brings you the same thing over and over and over again. It's not going to take you down all the way, but it's certainly not going to take you up. And we want you to be living your potential. It's a lot more fun. And what is your potential? Well, you know, it's got to evolve out of you. I know that, I'm doing what I do, and certainly I'm supposed to do what I'm supposed to do right now. But what am I supposed to do a year from here? I don't know. I'm open to it. If it's a deeper level of this, man, am I happy? If it is writing wonderful fiction books, hey, I'm happy. If it's anything, I'm happy. And I want you to be too. So part of this is cooperation with what and who you are. I have a silly analogy about that now. My hair is difficult. I got really coarse hair. It's very thick. I'm like a collie dog. When I haven't had a haircut, it blows out, right? I could get a cut that is cuts like I like, that I admire on actresses and models, and oh, those cuts are so cute. And I could try to force my hair to do it, but you know what? It's not going to look good. And I'm never going to be happy with it, and I'm going to spend far too much time on it. This is an image for you. Why not go with the natural growth? Why not go with your natural growth? Why not do this? Why not go on this journey? Why not recognize when you're not cooperating with your highest self? Why not recognize your issues that are all clouding the ego, clouding the ego child's mind? Why not recognize that part of you when it's in the way? Why not? And why not learn to be fully cooperative with this other energy? And life is going to be easier there for you. You will find what you're supposed to do there. What your divine purpose is, at least right now, and then next step, and next step, and next step, and next step. Kids forever. We're going to be learning and growing. We're going to be discovering novel things. Our relationships are going to be deeper. We're going to be more creative. We're going to enjoy what we're doing. In my course that I gave recently on this and on perfectionism is an issue, so I combined that with this talk of existentialism. And I have several people that I work with that are very, very much perfectionists. They are a little OCD. There's a little narcissism mixed in there. Very much perfectionism. Perfectionism is an issue. I take very big exception to psychology calling it positive and negative or pathological perfectionism. Isn't good. Because what they're missing is there's a higher mind that just enjoys what they're doing and wants to do good work. We want to thoroughly enjoy what we're doing. We want to bring everything to it. If we aren't good enough, we'll get a book or go to a class or something and learn to do it better. And it's all joyful. It's not a force like perfectionism is. You understand? I hope so. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think we are at the end of our show. Next week, we're going to go right back into some of this about authenticity. After this particular show, and I probably got another couple of shows on this, then we're going to go into creating the life you want in a very powerful way. Okay? We want to give you all the tools. Now look, I threw a lot at you. Do you know why I do that? Because your cells, like everything else in life, goes from chaos to order. If I give you too much to think about, whoa, jumbles your cells, the cells of your body, and you might lose an issue or two along the way and open your mind to something more. That's what I'm trying to affect in these radio shows when I toss all this information at you. So let's have it work for us that way. Okay. Let's do a quick prayer. Dear God, who is all there is, you who are all we are and all everything is in this world, we thank you so much for the healing that is taking place right now. We open ourselves to what you are doing in us, in our very cells, and we open ourselves to change, to grow, to growth, and to opportunity. We know the opportunity is right there. We thank you so much for all of that. Thank you, Kat. Dear God, we now say that we release all of this, that you may enter and replace all of this deprivation and our belief in lack with what is truly there. Deep levels of connection, deep levels of grounding, deep levels of creativity and love, and the knowledge that everything is indeed 100% okay. That there is a marvelous system right now, right here, that is working for us and always will and always has been. We open to this now, dear God, and we thank you for it all. We say this prayer in your name, in the name of the Ascended Masters, our love-centered guides and friends, and in the name of each and every person listening to the show today. And so it is. Amen. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you also for what you do for me and for this show and for our whole organization. You are getting the word around about these shows, and that, oh, thank you, Kat. I adore you too. Thank you so much, darling. I really do thank you for this. We don't do any advertising other than word of mouth and the advertising that you do for us on social media, and it means a lot. People are coming in all the time saying they enjoyed the shows, and this does matter. It really does, because if we are to send the word out about a better life in the way we do it, because many people are out there, we appreciate so much your volunteerism in terms of getting this out. It means a lot. Thank you so much for doing that. And if you will just continue to send these things out, that's very, very, very good. I just can't thank you thank you enough or tell you how much it's helping. So, thank you. You guys have a great week. All right? We'll be back next week with another show, and I look forward to talking with you then. Thanks for everything. Okay? You stay well and healthy out there now. Wear your masks or do whatever you need to do. But spray yourself with that alcohol. That alcohol is real good stuff. Don't drink it. It'll burn your stomach out. But it's really good about keeping us clean and germ-free. Have a great week. Bye-bye.